Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the NFL draft. Rick Saratella's on the line, so we've got to maximize our time here because this guy is one busy man this time of year, really the entire year. That's the only way you can compile this kind of information, so you got to check him out at NFLDraftBible.com. Drafting and rating players 75 deep at just about every position. It's just a wealth of information right there. We'll get you all the links down in the description section where you can find Rick. All right, wide receivers. People love to talk wide receiver, Rick, because they're the flashy guys, the guy that make the big plays and the highlight real type plays. And obviously we got two at Bama coming out. Henry Ruggs is the top end speed guy, but obviously Jerry Jeudy has distinguished himself for most people as the number one guy. So why is that the case?
I'm not so sure if that is the case because I've spoken to some teams that don't even view Jeudy as a first-round guy. He's number one on my board for what it's worth. I think he's the most polished guy in terms of size, speed, route running, and being able to make an immediate impact. I like Jerry Jeudy all day, but then I talk to scouts that say I don't even have him as a round one grade. And then you look at the Vegas odds and what they're putting out there, and CD Lamb is favored to be the first wide receiver off the board. So I'm not so sure Jeudy is the first wide receiver in this year's class. Again, I think it's a team by team, case by case scenario, but Ruggs' speed, that 23.1 on the catapults. I mean, that is a monitor that Alabama uses during practices to capture teams' player speed, and that's right up there with Tyreek Hill. I mean, he's got incredible speed, and I just don't see Ruggs sliding past Denver, who I think is 16 on the board. You got a big-armed quarterback in Drew Lock, and you can add that Tyreek Hill element to the offense. I think that's a match made in heaven. So that being said, we saw John Ross come off the board extremely high because of that speed, and that's the one thing that NFL teams crave. So I think, and we didn't even mention CeeDee Lamb, who I think could still be the first wide receiver off the board. You talk about speed, explosiveness, physicality, playmaking ability. CeeDee Lamb is right there in the mix.
So at every position, you've got a number of elements that you've got to consider in rating these guys. So let's just take wide receiver, for example. You've got collegiate production. You got those guys catching 90, 100 balls a year, and then you've got to weigh that against skill set in regards to what are the measurables, where's the ceiling, what did he run at the combine, what's the size, the weight, does he project as an NFL body and skill set. And then you're probably also looking at when you mentioned Jeudy's polish and really refining his game and being a guy that really takes those skills and already is ready made apparently for the NFL. So yeah, how do you weigh in all those components and then come out with a rating?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is, if I was working for a team, obviously I'd get with the coaching staff, find out what we're looking for, what our system is, how does a player fit our scheme. We're not doing that at the NFL Draft Bible. So I try to take the approach, well, if I'm an NFL franchise, I'm starting from ground zero. I have no players on my roster. I get to choose one wide receiver, or I've got to choose the best player to build my team upon. If I'm starting from zero, if I'm starting from scratch, who's the guy that I want to take? Who's the guy that I feel like is just the best overall player? And it becomes a tricky process. I mean, it really does. And a lot of X factors are weighed, and you go to the different schools. I saw 25 different games live. I visited another 25, 30 schools. So you try to gather the background information. You try to get to know the player. You try to get to know the player's family. Try to talk to the cafeteria worker, the strength and conditioning coach, find out the work ethic, what's in between the ears, what's in the heart, and all these factors come to fruition, and you try to make a final grade. And hey, Mark, as you know, nobody's perfected this formula of the draft process, and if they did, they'd be a millionaire a million times over. And I think that's the beauty and the fun of it all.
Yeah, as a Cleveland Browns fan, I will definitely attest to that, because I've thought for the last 20 years, why don't they send me that check? I could have been drafting just as bad over the last 20 years, aside from a Joe Thomas, which was a no-brainer for anybody. When I look at the wide receiver board, any college football fan is going to be like, okay, there's a who's who. They're all the big names, all the big schools across the board. So at what point are we talking about players that you think are going to be impact players in the NFL? Not necessarily a starter, but a guy that's going to catch 30, 40 balls a year, something in that range, versus where's that drop off? How many wide receivers do we have that are going to be players in the NFL?
I think that this is a great year for wide receivers. Probably the strongest class. 55 combine invites for wide receiver. I never seen anything like that before, which is incredible. So I think this year you're going to even get into early parts of day 3 where a guy like Jawan Johnson from Oregon, the Penn State transfer, big-bodied, 6'4" wide receiver, physical, one of the better blockers in this year's draft, but he struggled with a hamstring injury early this year. He had some dropsies, and that's a knock against him. So you might be able to get a high-caliber player like that on day 3. Darnell Mooney from Tulane. I mean, here's a guy who ran one of the fastest 40 times at the combine. He was out at the NFLPA Bowl. Talk about making splash plays. But again, that speed, how far back does he go? Because guys like Ruggs and a guy like a KJ Hamler even from Penn State is extremely fast. Talk about he might go round 3. And he might be a great slot weapon / return guy that's going to be a highly impactful player at the next level. So I think this year, even into day 3, you're going to find wide receivers. This Isaiah Coulter from Rhode Island. Gil Brandt said when we look back on the draft 10, 15 years from now, we're all going to wonder how Isaiah Coulter wasn't higher on our boards. And here's a guy, he could go round 1, he could go round 4. I don't know.
And then I kind of set you up for all the components that you've got to take into consideration. I didn't even mention competition. If you're playing in the SEC versus playing at Rhode Island, then you've got to try to measure that and project that guy.
It's tough, and I think that's where, luckily the Rhode Island guys had 3 combine invites, the 2 wide receivers and the offensive lineman. They had 3 combine invites Rhode Island did this year, which is remarkable. But, some of the other smaller school guys that got shut out from their pro days or didn't get the combine invite, that's the knock against the FCS, that lower level of competition. And you're going to find scouts are reluctant to stand on the table and pound the table for smaller school guys, even when they have the numbers. Now you don't know what a guy runs. You don't know what a shuttle and explosive is and vertical. And it's hard to really put stock and emphasis into that and really utilize a draft pick on a guy. Again, going back to our quarterback preview series at the top of that segment, it's just incomplete data. We don't know what the numbers are.